Hello, I'm Catherine Weatherburn, the founder of Safetyknot, and we work with construction companies and organisations who have construction elements in their projects, and we do this with the aim to promote safety and to prevent injury. In this video, we discuss excavation using hand tools and also mixing cement. Both of these are common activities on construction sites, but because of this, they're often regarded as low risk, and in our experience, anecdotally, these result in frequent minor injuries, which are often unreported. Now, I'd like to share with you a case study that we collected from a partner organisation that was operating in the PAL. It was a community construction project, and as a result, these were untrained workers and they were excavating using hand tools. It was the second day breaking ground, and as a result, the community had sent many people to help, as in our experience, it's really common for the first few days to send lots of people to get things going. As a result, though, it was really overcrowded and people working really closely together, as you'll see in the video. And they were digging a trench. Now, Mohit, we've changed his name. He was telling us that he was using a pickaxe to loosen the soil. He was working as fast as he could as he wanted to get back to his other job, which was farming. And he was getting really tired. It was very hot and he hadn't drunk any water for quite a while. But he was almost finished, so he wanted to keep going. He swung the pickaxe into the ground, then he lifted it up and brought it back past his head, over his shoulder to swing it down into the ground again. But as he swung it back, it suddenly felt lighter, and then he heard a scream. He looked around and he realised that the pickaxe head had flown off the wooden handle and it had hit another worker. Saraswati was standing close by him and it had hit her head. She wasn't wearing any head protection. Mohit hadn't checked the condition of the pickaxe before he began work, and he also didn't realise that Saraswati was right behind him. Everyone was rushing to finish so that they could get back to their work as a farmer. As a result, he hadn't looked around to see if anyone was nearby. Saraswati's head was bleeding very heavily. Now, in our experience, overcrowding and rushing are reasons workers commonly attribute to causes of injuries while excavating. This is particularly the case we've seen in community projects when breaking ground. We've been told that there's a societal expectation or even pressure that everyone will come out onto site during the first few days so that the project can really get going and have some momentum. So this is an example of where societal expectations or pressure can influence safety. Risk assessment should always be conducted prior to work starting, but in our experience, particularly in community construction projects, this isn't the case. And actually, this means that hazards are not identified. And as a result, no safety control measures can be put in place. And so we can see that from the case study. There wasn't enough space between workers. Workers weren't wearing PPE. Actually, in this instance, they hadn't been provided it. The condition of tools hadn't been checked. And rest and breaks and for hydration weren't being enforced. Just on a side note, in addition, there was no first aid kit and there were no first aiders on site, and also no insurance had been provided. So I think that the lessons to take on board when excavation work is being conducted are not to overcrowd and to discuss this community. And so you can work out how to best navigate societal expectations or pressures about sending a lot of people to the site in the first few days to break ground. And in your context, there may be other examples where there's similar issues that need to be discussed. And conducting a risk assessment is really important. And this needs to make sure that if PPE is required, it is actually provided. For example, proper footwear, ideally steel toe cap boots to protect toes, gloves, which should be cotton gloves for light duty or leather gloves for heavy duty, and safety helmets or hard hats, particularly if in rockfall prone areas or if there's any risk of anything falling or hitting onto someone's head. And if activities are being conducted, the eyes could be damaged, then eye protection such as safety goggles should be worn. And this should stop any penetrating shards of glass or rock getting into the eye. So checking the quality of tools prior to starting work is vital, and they should be checked to make sure they're in good condition and they should be well maintained. And if, for example, it's a pickaxe or something where there's different parts, they should be checking that there's not loose parts. As we heard in this case study, the pickaxe head actually flew off. Again, you need to discuss with your community how best to go about doing this, because there's often the expectation that on community projects that they'll actually bring their own tools. So if they're damaged or they need to be repaired or replaced, who is going to pay for this? Spacing is also really important. especially if community members are excavating a pipeline, for example. The number of people in a trench should be limited to ensure that there is enough space between each worker. And ideally, this should be a minimum of 3 meters apart. Also, limiting the number of workers that are actually on site. Or if people are working in pairs, often in our experience, people dig in pairs, one excavates and the other clears. Make sure that only one of the pair is in the excavation at a time to ensure that there's adequate space between them. Encourage workers to take regular breaks in shade, to hydrate, and to stop if they get tired. But again, this is something you'll need to discuss with your community because there are societal pressures about how many breaks people should take, for example. Also, there's an expectation that people will be able to get back to their other jobs, such as farming, and as a result, they might want to limit the number of breaks that they actually take. Another common construction activity, which is anecdotally reported to us by workers to cause frequent minor injuries, is working with cement. So in our experience, because handling and mixing cement is a very common activity on a construction site, it is often regarded as low risk and, compared to other activities, it is low risk. But therefore, often no or fewer safety control measures are taken by workers. As a result, common injuries while working with cement are that people could carry a bag of cement that's too heavy for them. They could slip, they could trip when moving cement bags, they could have muscular skeletal injuries. They could inhale cement dust when they open the bag, and they can also get irritation if cement burns if the cement gets onto their skin. Now, you know your community best, and I just want to pose a few questions to you to think about in relation to your community, to think how would they react in these situations. So, as I've said, working with cement is a common construction activity and therefore is often viewed as a low risk activity because, as I say, compared to other activities on site, it is. But few or no safety control measures are taken, which actually can result in a more serious injury occurring for the level of risk of the activity. So, for example, have you ever seen workers carry a 50 kg bag of cement? Have you ever seen workers carrying a 50 kg bag of cement wearing flip-flops or sandals? In our experience, this is a preferred footwear, particularly in hot climates. But the challenge here in terms of safety is there's little to no grip. This can result in slips or trips, especially if working in areas where the area hasn't been cleared. Are workers aware of the potential harm to their lungs if they inhale cement dust, or do they think it's fine if they're working outside? If a worker has been provided PPE while working with cement, but they're not using it, why not? For example, is the PPE uncomfortable? Is it hot? Is it damaged? Does it fit? Do the workers know the benefits to wearing it? Or do they know the benefits, but they feel it's not really a real risk or they prefer not to wear it? There are many, many reasons to the answers to the questions that I've just posed to you. But I just wanted you to start to think about why workers that you work with are doing what they're doing. Now, if you don't know, please ask them. Ask them because they know why they're doing or not doing certain safety precautions. But I'd like to finish this video of sharing some safety practices implemented by our partner organisations, which they feel can reduce the risk of injury from working with cement. So they say that cement should be stored in a dry place until ready to use. And before anyone begins work or to carry anything, it should always be checked if there's a clear route and that there's nothing on the ground that can present as a slip or trip hazard because it's one of the most common injuries on a construction site. Carrying a 50 kg bag of cement does have the real risk of harming the person carrying it. You could hurt your back, you may slip, you may trip, you may fall, and then you may have another injury as well. So it's advised, or our partners advise, that if you are using 50 kg bags of cement, which is what they often come in, then to divide these into smaller bags, or potentially to use a wheelbarrow to move these. When opening the cement bags, be careful that you do not breathe or inhale the cement dust, as this can be really bad for your lungs, and a mask should be worn if it's been provided. To stop cement getting onto the skin, you should always cover your arms with long sleeves and also your legs with trousers. Again, this might be a challenge in hot climates where people are tending to wear shorts, but every context is different. Appropriate gloves should be made of PVC or nitrile, and they should be tight-fitting and disposable. And if workers haven't been given gloves, they should really be asking the person in charge of the construction site for a pair of suitable gloves because they also have responsibilities to keep themselves safe. However, it may be that there's not gloves available. And again, this would be a conversation to have with your workers. Also to wear closed footwear to protect feet from injury. And if large concrete pours are taking place, wear gum boots or Wellington boots, which should be high enough to prevent concrete from actually entering the top of the boot. And if cement does get onto the skin, it should be washed off as soon as possible, which is why it's vital that there's washing stations on site. I'd also just like to touch upon mixing cement using a portable machine cement mixer rather than by hand. This is a higher risk activity just due to the rotating movements. We're using machinery here. So there's rotating paddles inside the drum, and a body part could get caught between the moving drum and a stationary part in the mixer. So to reduce this real risk of injury, workers should not wear loose clothing or jewellery, as this can get caught in the moving parts and cause serious injury. Now, depending on what context you're working in, this might need to be discussed because, for example, in Nepal, then women wear saris when they're working on construction sites, and these can be loose and can get and have been caught with this mixer. Hair also should be tied up so that it's not get tangled in the moving parts, because this does have real potential to cause harm. And before mixing on the cement, workers should make sure there's nothing inside in there, such as other equipment or tools that's being stored. And mixers should never be overloaded, left unattended when it's running. The guard should always be left in place in use. And finally, the cement mixer shouldn't be moved when it's in use, as this could tip over and cause injury. So in community construction projects, there's often manual handling involved. Manual handling or lifting things up can cause a lot of injuries. And this is commonly seen on construction sites where materials are handled and transported. And these can cause musculoskeletal disorders, including injuries and conditions that can cause pain to the back, to joints, to limbs. And heavy manual labour, repetitive handling, awkward positions and postures, and also previous or existing injuries or conditions are all risk factors for developing these musculoskeletal disorders. But I'm sure in your experience, definitely in our experience, we've seen workers carrying very heavy loads. As I gave the example, 50 kg bags of cement. Now, I suppose another question is, do you think workers are aware of the legal limit of weight that they're allowed to carry? This varies from country to country. So, as an example, in the UK, men are legally allowed to carry 25 kg and women 16, whereas in Nepal, men are legally allowed to carry 25 kg and women 20. But we've often been told by workers that they're carrying 50 kg bags of cement because they're strong, because it's a short distance. And also they lift this load outside of this construction site. So for example, on farms, when they're not being under the construction rules and regulations, they carry these loads. So why can't they do it on site? People also worry that if they open the cement bag, then it will get damp. So they prefer just to carry it to get it done, and they want to do it quickly. But as I said, this can result in musculoskeletal disorders and injuries. So here, thinking about the hierarchy of controls, where elimination to carry the load if possible is best, or if this cannot be avoided, consider if there's any automated or mechanized lifting and carrying devices that can be used, such as wheelbarrows. A risk assessment should be conducted, and risks arising from the task load, working environment, individual capacity, any materials, handling equipment, and the pace, frequency, and duration of work should all be considered. If, though, there is no alternative but to manually handle loads, if before lifting, a good posture should be adopted. So the load should be hugged, it should be kept close to the body. One should lift with the legs, not with the back. Knees are bent and your back is straight, because it's really important that workers know that spines are not designed to lift. Avoid twisting or leaning and keep your head up. Where necessary, push a load rather than pull. And there should be limits of how much people should carry. And this shouldn't change just because it's a short distance. Even someone's very strong and they say, yes, I can carry a 50 kg bag of cement. I do this all the time. They shouldn't be doing it. Or they can, but they're at risk of these musculoskeletal injuries, and they need to be aware of these risks to themselves. So in some cases where it's heavy loads, 2 or more people may be carrying a load together. So communication is key. It needs to be communicated when the load will be lifted up, when it'll be picked up, which direction they're moving in, and when to put the load down. Another consideration is the prevention of slips, trips and falls. As I say, these are one of the most common injuries on a construction site, and they can lead to more major injuries depending on where they fall, for example. So, according to the Health and Safety Executive in the UK, the HSE, statistics show slipping and tripping a single most common cause of major injury in the UK places. And as I said, this is because they're often initiators of accidents. It's because they're attributed to other causes, such as falls from height. So, for example, someone could trip and then fall from height and have a major injury. And a common reason for slips and trips on a work site is uneven sites and uneven surfaces, because these can create trip and slip hazards. But being aware and implementing safety control measures can help to prevent these very common injuries. Now, a lot of these control measures are centered around footwear and walking. So to have a good firm hold on the ground with your feet reduces risk of slips, trips and falls. So ideally, workers should be wearing footwear which has grippy soles, which are slip resistant. However, in my experience in working in hot climates, people like to wear flip-flops or sandals. This is because it's comfort. This is what they're used to wearing. And actually, workers have specifically told us if they're given gumboots to wear, that they feel less confident working in them than they do in sandals or flip-flops, because that's what they use every day. But workers may not have been given this option. They may not have been provided other footwear. So when possible, when people are walking, they should avoid wet or slippery surfaces to avoid the risk of slips, trips and falls. And instead, any slippery surfaces should be walked around, even if it's quicker to walk through it. People should be walking at an appropriate speed for the ground conditions, which might sound a bit silly, but people are often in a rush and they want to get work done. If it's been raining, this is going to increase the risk of slip, trips and falls. So making sure that walking is the appropriate speed for the ground conditions. So one thing that walkers can do is to walk slower to reduce this risk of slip, trips and falls. It could be that there's ice or snow, and then it should be considered whether it's necessary to stop work. As I've said repeatedly in this video, a lot of slips, trips and falls happen due to untidy sites. And this could be that tools are not stored properly, they're left on the ground, there could be debris, there could be building materials. And to reduce this risk, cables, for example, should be covered or out of the way to ensure that no one trips over them. Now, where necessary, it might be that warning signs should be erected to show that there's slip and trip hazards. It could be that barriers are put around excavations and holes to prevent falls. Now, these should ideally all be lit at night, especially if people are working in the dark or camping is on site or people are living on site. And finally, if any trips, slips or falls do occur, whilst they're very common, reporting is really important. And the reason why is because if we think back to the injury triangle, if we report near misses or we report minor injuries, then we have the ability to stop more major injuries from happening. So this is an opportunity to learn so that appropriate safety control measures can be put in place to hopefully stop this incident from happening again. So I really hope that you found this video helpful and it has prompted you to think about some of the manual construction activities that your community regularly does, and how that actually some of these activities, because they're so common, are perceived as low or even no risk. And as a result, safety control measures are not taken, which can result in these lower risk activities actually becoming higher risk and resulting in more major injuries.